Hello and welcome. I'm so glad you're here tonight. My name is Insert Name, and I'll be your guide through a story that will hopefully bring you some calm, a little peace, and maybe a sense of quiet understanding as you drift into sleep. Tonight's tale is titled Chapter 1, Wandering in Shadows. It's a story of love, loss, and reflection. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're joining from tonight. Maybe a city that never stops moving, or a small, quiet town on the edge of the woods. Wherever it may be, I hope this story finds you in the perfect spot to let go and simply listen. Now, let's settle in, take a deep breath, and let the story unfold. The night is soft, cloaked in gentle shadows and laced with the hum of crickets just outside the window. That peaceful sort of midnight hush wraps itself around me as I sit here, remembering a time when life felt brighter and simpler. There's a certain magic to memories, isn't there? They're like quiet whispers in the darkness, pulling us back to long-gone moments we thought we'd forgotten. And so, in the stillness of this night, my mind wanders back to when everything was different. I grew up in a house filled with music, not the kind that came from radios or instruments, though those had their moments, but the music of laughter, voices overlapping in conversation, and the easy rhythm of a family that just seemed to fit together. My parents had a way of making everything feel secure, steady, like no matter what storm might come, we'd face it as one. I can still picture that old house where we lived, walls painted warm, golden tones that glowed in the afternoon sun, and the faint scent of fresh bread always lingering in the air. My mother loved to bake, you see, and she would hum little songs under her breath as her hands worked the dough. My father, he was the quieter sort, a man who chose his words carefully. But when he laughed, it was impossible not to join him. His laughter was deep, like the sound of distant thunder, and it always lit up the room in a way that made everything feel a little lighter. And then there were my siblings. Oh, the endless games and plans we concocted together. We ran through dewy fields in summer, our shoes damp and slick with grass, and huddled close under patchy blankets in winter, telling each other wild stories to make the nights feel less cold. We shared everything, our joys, our fears, even the inevitable little arguments that would always give way to smiles again. I suppose when I think about it, those days felt so steady, so unshakable, that I never imagined anything could change. But life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? Its currents aren't always kind, and they don't always warn us when they're about to shift. For my family, the change came too swiftly to truly grasp. It began with the smallest of ripples, a poor financial choice, a downturn in the markets. I didn't understand much of it at first. I only knew that my father started coming home later, his face worn and his voice a little quieter than before. My mother, who could always hide her worries so well, began to let them slip through in the way she fidgeted with her wedding ring or stared too long out the kitchen window. Then, there came the day when the ripple became a wave, and the wave swept us away entirely. My father lost the business he had built with such care, and with it went our livelihood. The house, the one with the warm, golden walls and the music of our memories, had to be sold. I remember walking through the empty rooms one last time, running my fingers along the door frames as if trying to capture some piece of what once was. They told us we'd rebuild, that this was just a chapter, one we'd close before starting the next. But not all stories work out that way. You see, my family was proud. They had always valued appearances, and when those appearances shattered, something inside them shifted. There were whispered conversations behind closed doors, strained silences that filled the air like a weight. At first, I tried to tell myself it was temporary, that perhaps it was only the stress of it all pulling us apart. But as the days turned to weeks and weeks to months, I began to see the truth taking shape. One by one, they began to look at me differently, as though losing everything had somehow been my fault. My father, who had always laughed like thunder, grew quiet and distant. My mother stopped humming when she baked, though if I'm being honest, she baked far less often in those days. And my siblings, the ones who once ran with me through the fields and shared their secrets by the fire, started to edge away. It's strange, isn't it, how something as intangible as rejection can feel so heavy, like an invisible weight pressing against your chest, making it harder to breathe. It wasn't overt, at least not at first. There were no fights, no accusations, but it was in the little things. The way their eyes would shift away when I entered a room, or how conversations would falter, then change when I added my voice. They didn't need to say it out loud. I could feel it in their absence, in the growing distance between us. I tried, oh, how I tried to bridge that gap, to prove to them I hadn't changed, or maybe to remind them of who I had always been. But each attempt felt like throwing stones into an ocean, the ripples fading before they could reach the shore. And then came the day, clear and sharp in my memory, when the gap became a chasm too wide to cross. I had asked for their help, just a small thing, a favor that any family might have offered without a second thought. I still remember the way the silence filled the room after I made my plea. My father had looked at me, his expression unreadable, before turning away to say he couldn't. My mother didn't meet my eyes, and my siblings found places to be that weren't in the same room. That was the moment I realized I was alone. What a strange feeling that is, to be surrounded by the people who once made you feel most alive, and yet to feel as if you're invisible. Their rejection wasn't loud or cruel. It was silent, like the way the sun sets and leaves behind the chill of night. Perhaps that's what made it hurt more. The quietness of it. For a long time after, I carried that silence with me. Through sleepless nights, I lay awake, staring up at ceilings that were never as familiar as that of the home we had lost. The weight of rejection pressed down heavily, whispering questions to me in the dark. What had I done wrong? Had I not been enough for them to hold on to? Sometimes, I wished I could forget. Other times, I clung to the memories of our past as if they were some lifeline pulling me from the abyss of loneliness. I thought of my father's laughter as it once was, my mother humming her songs, my siblings giggling over some shared secret. Those moments felt so distant, so unreachable, like trying to hold on to smoke. Now, years have passed. Time has softened the jagged edges of those memories, though it hasn't erased them. And on nights like this, in the softness of the shadows, they return to me with a bittersweet clarity. The crickets outside are still chirping, their song a steady reminder that life moves forward, whether we're ready for it or not. And as I sit here sharing this with you, whoever you may be, I'm reminded of something my father used to say in those better days. Even in the darkest night, he would tell me, there's always something worth holding on to, a glimmer, a star, even just a memory. Perhaps that's why I tell this story tonight. Not for the sadness of it, but for the way it makes me hold on to the memories that mattered and still matter. Yes, the shadows are here, but so too are the glimpses of light. And now, my friend, as we leave this chapter behind, let the soft hum of the night carry you into your dreams. Let go and rest. I remember the quiet that seemed to linger as I woke that morning. The air was cool, gently brushing my skin as the first light of dawn unfurled over the horizon. There was something tender, bittersweet about it, the kind of morning that whispered of endings, yet carried the promise of beginnings in its delicate embrace. That day, I took my first steps away from everything I had ever known, every memory tied to the life I'd once believed would last forever. The streets were silent, save for the occasional murmur of wind slipping between the buildings, stirring the leaves scattered across the cobblestone paths. The world itself felt as though it were holding its breath. My bag was light, nearly empty apart from a few essentials, yet the weight pressing upon my heart made every step feel heavy at first. Tentative. I had spent countless hours wrestling with doubt before coming to this decision, walking away from it all, yet standing there in the fragile light of morning, I felt something loosen within me. The pain, still lingering from rejection's sting, softened slightly, if only for a moment. Each step carried me further from the shadows of the past, and with every breath, I began to reclaim pieces of myself. The sky shifted from pale lavender to soft gold as the sun rose higher, its rays breaking through the clouds in brilliant streaks that painted the landscape in warmth. There was still a chill in the air, but the sunlight offered a gentle counterpoint, a tender touch against my face, as if to remind me that even on the coldest mornings, there's still warmth to be found. I can still remember the way the dew glistened on the blades of grass lining the path, or how the distant cries of birds echoed faintly in the background, their songs weaving gently with the rustle of branches stirred by the breeze. These were the moments where silence became a gift, a balm for an aching heart. Nature had a way of speaking to me in its quiet rhythms. There's a profound simplicity in the rustle of leaves, the soft crunch of soil beneath your feet, and the faint trickle of water trailing somewhere unseen. I found companionship in these sounds, like a wordless conversation between me and the world. Each step away from my former home brought me deeper into landscapes teeming with life, yet peaceful in their own way. A solace that had come to feel almost sacred during my earlier wanderings. On days when the ache of rejection pulled too strongly, I would venture into the woods, let the towering trees envelop me, and feel the weight of their timeless patience. It was there among the quiet giants where I began to feel less like a drifting shadow and more like someone rooted, even if only momentarily. I remember stopping along a narrow trail to rest. The dirt bank was cool beneath my hands, rough yet grounding. Above me, the canopy of leaves filtered sunlight into patches on the ground, tiny pools of gold dancing around me. I inhaled deeply, letting the earthy scent of moss and damp bark fill my lungs. There was something infinitely calming in the simplicity of those moments. A reminder that the world is vast, ever-moving, and that amidst its chaos, there are places where peace still lingers. I closed my eyes and allowed myself to absorb the sounds. The gentle hum of life pressed against the edges of my thoughts, nudging away the painful echoes that had clung to me so stubbornly. When I opened them again, the path ahead stretched quietly, winding through an unfolding tapestry of greens and soft browns, blending seamlessly into the blush of wildflowers dotting the grass in vivid crescents. There was no urgency in my stride, no rush to reach a specific destination. For the first time in a long while, I felt no pressing timeline dictating my movements. The journey itself was enough, a quiet rebellion against the weight of expectation that had often tethered me in place. My wanderings had no map, no structured plan, but with each step, I felt something flicker in the depths of my being, a faint spark urging me not to stop, not to let the uncertainty ahead overwhelm me. And so, I kept walking. The sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the cool edges of morning into something softer, a gentle touch rather than a sharp nip. My pace changed, growing steadier as my legs adjusted to the rhythm of the ground beneath them. I let my hand trail against a nearby hedge as I passed, the tiny leaves brushing over the skin of my fingertips. The sensation was soothing, grounding me in the present, rather than the swirling thoughts of what-ifs and lingering doubts. Every texture, the rough stone of walls, the soft velvet of flower petals alongside the path, even the imperfect divots in the dirt, had its own quiet rhythm. I was learning, moment by moment, to appreciate these small details, even amidst the uncertainty. As the trail opened wider, familiar landscapes began to fade, giving way to unfamiliar terrain. The streets gave way to long stretches of fields, their grasses dancing lazily in the wind under the vastness of the sky. It was here, beyond the boundaries of what had once been my home, that I felt the weight of freedom settling in, not heavy or oppressive, but something gentle, tentative, like a blanket draped over weary shoulders, reminding me that solitude didn't have to feel lonely. It could also be a refuge. Every so often, I would pause to catch my breath and marvel at the way the light shifted as time passed. Shadows stretched across the ground in elegant patterns, weaving themselves into a whispered dance I could watch for hours. There was a kind of beauty in their fleeting nature, a reminder that we too are becoming, continually changing, even when we don't realize it. It was during one of these pauses that I felt it again, the spark, faint but alive, pushing me deeper into the unknown, asking me gently, quietly, to trust the path ahead, however unclear it may seem. There were moments along the way when uncertainty would creep back in. Questions rose like tidal waves, tempting me to doubt the choices I'd made. What if I wasn't strong enough to rebuild? What if loss was all I'd ever know? But I steadied my breath and reminded myself, this journey was about finding light where it had seemed extinguished. It wasn't about pretending pain didn't exist. It was about learning to carry it while still moving forward. I focused instead on the infinite possibilities carried by the gentle winds that shifted around me, tugging at my hair lightly, as though they too whispered encouragement. Crossing the last remnants of farmland, I allowed those whispers to guide my thoughts toward openness, toward resilience. For in every closed door, there exists the faint possibility of new openings. Often it begins not with monumental gestures, but small steps like this. Simply walking forward, even if you're unsure of where the path leads. As the day began to fade into its twilight hues, I found myself settling in for the night on the far edge of a grassy hillside. The air grew cooler again, carrying with it the faint scent of nearby wild rosemary and pine. Above, streaks of soft pink and orange draped the edges of the sky, framing the onset of stars in delicate contrast. I was tired but content in a way I hadn't felt in ages. The ache of rejection dulled slightly by the comforting touch of nature and the steady rhythm of progress beneath my feet. Lying there, with the ground firm beneath me and the vast sky stretched above, I allowed myself to breathe deeply. The swell of uncertainty still lingered in the back of my mind, but something new softened its edges, a quiet hope, fragile but growing. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was space for me to rebuild, to rediscover. Nature had shown me resilience, its ability to flourish despite the inevitable changes of season, and in those lessons, I began to see echoes of my own possibility. As I stared at the first stars appearing, bright and unwavering above, I felt the spark return. Faint, but insistent, it urged me again to trust the unknown, to embrace the uncertainty, to believe, even after heartbreak, there could be better days ahead. With that thought nestled deep in my chest, I closed my eyes. Leaves rustled faintly in the distance, a nearby creek whispered softly, and the earth cradled me in its quiet embrace. That night, I felt ready, ready to keep journeying forward, step by step. The train arrived late, almost midnight, and the station was barely more than a clearing in the countryside, with a crooked wooden sign hanging from rusted metal hinges to mark its name. The night stretched wide and silent, stars scattered like grains of salt across a deep velvet sky. A cool breeze rippled through the air, carrying the faint rustle of leaves and the distant sound of an owl calling out its lonely vigil. I stepped off the train with a small suitcase in hand, everything I owned packed inside, and felt the faint crunch of gravel underfoot, sharp and uneven, yet somehow steady, grounding me in this new place. This was where my journey had led me, far from the familiar warmth of home, far from the ache of loss. The town was quiet, its streets cobblestone pathways softened by years of travel and weather. It felt old, like it had worn the weight of time gracefully, with buildings standing as humble reminders of generations past. Lampposts lined the main road in clusters, their golden light weak but intimate, spilling onto the streets in soft pools that barely reached the edges of shadow. I took slow steps, thoughtful steps, listening to my own movement echo faintly in the stillness. Each footfall marked the start of something different, a life I had scarcely imagined before now. Securing work was not easy. I was unknown here, a stranger without ties or roots, and that made some wary of me. I walked from one place to the next, knocking on doors, asking questions with a quiet voice that I hoped carried sincerity above all else. It wasn't rejection that stung the most, though it was never pleasant, but the long silences, the uncertainty, the moments in between that stretched like heavy hours. Those first few days felt endless, an obstacle at every turn. Yet I began to notice something. The people here moved differently, slower, more deliberate. They seemed accustomed to the rhythm of life that pauses, that waits and lingers, and somehow that quiet patience eased something within me too. Late one afternoon, nestled within the shade of an old brick building with ivy creeping up its side, a man called out to me as I passed. His voice was weathered but kind, like worn leather soft from use. He held tools in his hand, a hammer, a piece of sandpaper, and he looked at me with eyes that understood more than I was ready to offer. "You looking for work?" he asked simply, and for a moment I couldn't find my voice. I nodded instead, and that was apparently enough. The job was modest, fixing, sanding, carrying supplies back and forth. The kind of work that requires no real expertise, but every ounce of effort. There was a workshop, smelling of sawdust and oil, with benches scratched and marked from countless projects long completed. The space hummed faintly under the buzz of fluorescent lighting, flickering now and then like a firefly in summer. My hands grew rough quickly, the smoothness of skin traded for calluses born from labor. But there was something deeply grounding in it, a kind of simplicity, a rhythm. The ache of exhaustion settled into me quietly without protest, becoming a companion I learned to carry without resentment. Nights were long. I returned each evening to a narrow room in a boarding house on the edge of town, its hardwood floors worn but still warm under my bare feet. The mattress was thin enough that I felt the creak of the wooden frame beneath it, but in those first weeks, even that spoke of comfort. Shadows gathered across the walls, their edges soft as candlelight flickered from the small flame I lit before bed. Outside my window, the sound of crickets filled the air, their soft chorus rising and falling in unison like a tide. I lay there each night, staring at the ceiling, feeling the heaviness of weariness pull over me like a blanket, yet also something else, purpose. It filled the spaces between thoughts, like ink seeping across paper. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't haunted by aimlessness or regret. I had a path now, even if the stones were uneven, and that was enough. At first, it was hard to see beyond each day. I counted hours by the movement of sunlight on the walls of the workshop, by the shift in temperature as dusk approached. Exhaustion was a sharp companion, moments of rest fleeting but deeply satisfying. Yet through the haze of work, something else took root that I hadn't anticipated. A small spark, a glimmer. Confidence. It didn't arrive suddenly, but rather crept into my days in unexpected ways. A task completed just slightly quicker than before. A word of approval from the man who had given me that first chance. A quiet sense of capability that I'd never allowed myself to feel fully until now. I watched myself change in ways both small and steady. Each morning as I dressed, pulling my boots onto tired feet, I began to meet my own eyes in the mirror. It was faint at first, that glance, a kind of recognition I couldn't yet name, but it grew stronger with time. There was strength in those moments, in seeing myself as not just something burdened by difficulties, but as someone becoming more than what I had been. The town began to feel less foreign as well. On weekends, when I walked its streets to clear my mind, children's laughter spilled from open yards, their voices tumbling over fences and hedges like bells ringing in the breeze. There was the scent of baking bread from a small cafe near the center, its windows slightly fogged from steam as trays were brought out to cool. The pavement beneath me, uneven yet forgiving, felt familiar now, a texture I had grown accustomed to. People started greeting me as I passed, brief nods or soft smiles that reminded me I was no longer invisible. Small victories, yes, but ones I held tightly, their weight far greater than they seemed. In moments of reflection, often curled in a chair by the window as moonlight spilled faintly across my lap, I thought about home, about the people I'd left behind, the memories that still lingered just beneath the surface of quietness. There was pain there, of course, a longing that time hadn't dulled, but I carried it differently now. It no longer felt like an anchor pulling me back, but like the roots of a tree, grounding me, reminding me what had shaped me even as I learned to grow beyond it. There were nights when the loneliness returned with a sharper edge, when I found myself staring at the stars outside my window and wondering if I'd made the right choice. If this path I was carving was truly leading somewhere brighter. Yet in those moments, I'd remember the hands now steady from labor, the subtle strength in waking each morning with purpose, and the quiet triumph of standing firmly on my own. Independence had arrived slowly, quietly, but it was real now. I could feel its presence, not just in the actions I took, but in the way I thought. Doubt still swirled now and then, as it surely does for each of us, but there was a clarity rising within it, a belief in what could be, in what I was capable of shaping. Day by day, hour by hour, I found that even the moments of hardship bore gifts I hadn't expected. The weight of exhaustion carried its reward in restful sleep. The ache of labor brought with it the satisfaction of completion. What was once overwhelming began to feel like proof of what I could endure, what I could overcome. My thoughts grew quieter too, no longer the frantic rush of questions and uncertainties, but a steady, even current guiding me forward. And so I lived, one day, and then the next, in that small town so far from everything I had once known. It wasn't a grand story, perhaps. There were no great successes or resounding triumphs that marked it. But there was beauty in its quiet simplicity, in the humble rhythm of progress, in the slow strength that comes from simply moving forward. The future still felt uncertain, its shape blurred and indistinct, but no longer did I fear its approach. Because now I was learning to stand in the present with quiet resilience, to face adversity with a steady resolve, and with each breath, each step, I began to envision something brighter waiting on the horizon. The morning felt like a blank canvas, the kind that invited possibility, yet still held the weight of uncertainty in its quiet folds. I remember standing by the window, the sunlight spilling in like golden syrup, pooling across the wooden floor. A hesitant breeze wandered through the frame, carrying the sweet scent of dew-soaked grass and the light, peppery smell of earth warmed by the dawn. It was one of those mornings that felt like an offering, as though the world were whispering, "Go ahead, begin again." The decision had been made, though not without its share of sleepless nights and twisting over the what-ifs. Starting something of my own felt vast, like standing at the edge of a shoreline, watching waves roll in endless succession, each one both familiar and unpredictable. I had the idea, quietly nurtured over years of dreaming, half-formed sketches on scraps of paper, idle musings spoken aloud on lonely evenings. But it was different now, real, alive in my hands. With trembling resolve, I visited the bank. The building smelled faintly of polished wood and ink. The sound of pens scratching against paper echoed beneath the faint hum of fluorescent lights. I gripped the edge of the desk tightly as I spoke to the loan officer, my knuckles pale against the soft grain of the surface. My request was modest, the kind that danced somewhere between ambition and practicality. I explained my vision, a venture not driven by profit, but by a simple, heartfelt hope to bring something gentle and good into the world. The officer was kind, if pragmatic, offering me steady, reassuring nods as I stumbled over my words. When I stepped out onto the sidewalk with the loan in hand, it felt as if the air grew lighter. Each step home carried me closer to this fragile beginning, like planting a tiny seed into fertile, uncertain soil, the soil that was my own courage and determination. My breath came slower, more grounded, each exhale releasing the lingering grip of hesitation. There were weeks of preparation that followed, weeks where time seemed to blur softly, like smudged chalk on a pavement. I gathered materials, reading instruction manuals late into the night, my tiny desk lit only by the warm glow of a single lamp. The faint clicking of my pen punctuated the stillness as I made lists, crossed out ideas, and refined details. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. I could feel it taking shape. Then came the first real day of work, the soft hum of anticipation buzzing faintly beneath my skin. The space I had rented was modest, its walls painted in pale hues that caught the morning light just enough to make the room feel alive. I remember kneeling down on the cool, tiled floor, arranging supplies in neat rows, sifting through the details with a quiet diligence. A gentle excitement fluttered within me, like the first stirrings of spring after winter's long rest. But beginnings, no matter how tender, are rarely without struggle. The first challenge came unexpectedly, and with the weight of 100 storms. Supplies I'd ordered were delayed, calls were made, polite but firm, the melodic tone of my voice gradually fraying into sharper notes of frustration. Days stretched into weeks, and I found myself grappling with compromises, shifting my plans to accommodate what felt like a series of doors shutting softly, one after the other. Clients, rare, nervous arrivals at first, circled back on promises, their cheerful inquiries trailing into silence. Slowly, uncertainty crept in, its edges curling over my steadfast resolve like frost on a window pane. Doubts began to stir in the corners of my mind during the quietest hours, those moments where the walls seemed wider than they had any reason to be, and the silence bore down like heavy fabric. Could I do this? Had I sunk myself into something too vast, too intricate for someone like me? One evening, long after the sun had retired behind folds of velvet night, I sat alone in my little space. Only the hum of streetlights filtered through the curtains, painting faint shadows across the walls. My hands rested idly on my lap, their surface cold, their usual movement gone still. I closed my eyes, just for a moment, feeling the dense weight of exhaustion sinking into the edges of my thoughts. It was then that a sound interrupted the stillness, a knock upon the door, gentle but deliberate. I rose, my steps slow, hesitant. As I opened it, the faint scent of rain met me, carried on the night breeze. Standing there was a stranger, a kind face, framed by gentle lines of experience, holding a package wrapped tightly in waxed paper. "I was passing by," they said, voice soft but steady, the words rounding themselves into warm arcs in the air. "I thought you might need this." Inside the package were supplies, simple but essential things I had been missing. Their generosity was quiet, matter of fact, offered without expectation. I realized then how profound a single act of kindness could be, how it could sit quietly beside despair and gently nudge it aside, just enough to let hope peek through. I thanked them in a voice that trembled only slightly, and as they headed into the quiet of the evening, I watched them disappear into the inky shadows of the street lamps, feeling something shift, the smallest, most imperceptible movement. From there, connections began weaving themselves into my story like wisps of distant sunlight. A mentor, someone I'd met through the recommendations of a kind stranger, offered their counsel with a patience that felt almost infinite. Their voice, purposeful but soothing, guided me through the challenges I'd struggled to untangle alone. Advice, quiet anecdotes, and patient explanations carved a path through the fog of uncertainty, showing me moments of clarity I hadn't thought possible. Each small act of aid came with an unspoken reminder. You don't have to carry this entirely by yourself. Threads of kindness, offered by strangers and guides, began tying themselves to the fragile fabric of my dream, patching up the frayed edges. I no longer felt quite so adrift. And so I persisted, against days where the sky above seemed heavy and unyielding, against setbacks that clung like burrs to my ankles, slowing my steps. Little by little, like a sapling breaking through the earth, something began to grow. My venture was small, still humble in its scale, but it was taking its first true breaths, standing just a little taller with each passing week. The struggles were not forgotten. They still lingered in the quiet moments, waiting on the periphery of my thoughts, ready to rise with the faintest whisper. But resilience, I discovered, doesn't mean absence of doubt. It means standing beside it, unwavering. It means holding steady through loss and carrying forth even when the footing feels unsure beneath you. That was when I realized planting a seed isn't just an act of beginning. It's an act of faith. Faith that despite drought, sudden storms, and barren soil lying beneath, life can still grow. Against the shifting textures of uncertainty, against a backdrop of obstacles no one could see from the outside, I pressed forward with a resolve that almost surprised me. The nights of hard work continued, accompanied by the faint hum of fluorescent bulbs above and the rhythmic beat of rain against the panes of glass. The weight of quiet hours became lighter, fuller, not with success, but with the simple determination that comes from knowing you're doing something worthy simply because it matters to you. And the dawn that followed brought with it the scent of distant opportunities, like blossoms carried on the wind, gentle change unfolding, just out of reach, but steadily moving closer. I could not predict what lay ahead for me, how the path would continue to wind, whether success or failure waited on the other side. But this much was clear. The work I had begun wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to the cracks kindness had filled, the voices that had spoken encouragement into the quiet chambers of despair. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hope blooming alongside the calm, inch by inch, like a garden growing against all odds. The years passed like the steady rhythm of a quiet stream, each one trickling into the next, carrying with it moments of effort, uncertainty, and small triumphs that grew like the ivy creeping up the fence outside my window. What began as the faintest spark of possibility, a small glimmer in the dark, had started to take shape, transforming into something more substantial than I had ever dared to dream. At first, it was little more than a whisper of progress. I still remember the first time someone showed genuine interest in what I was creating, a stranger who paused long enough to reach out. Their words were as simple as they were profound. "You've made something beautiful." That single exchange, so fleeting, yet full of warmth, lingered with me long after they had gone, wrapping around me like a soft shawl on a crisp evening. It was the first sign that my vision, planted with trembling hands all those months ago, might just take root. There were milestones, though they came slowly at first, like tentative shoots pushing through frozen ground. My small venture began to reach farther than I had imagined, branching out beyond the circle of my own making. I can still recall the quiet thrill of those moments, when I realized that what I had nurtured in solitude was beginning to touch the lives of others in ways I hadn't expected. Messages of encouragement began to arrive, sometimes from people I had never met, but who spoke to me with such sincerity that it felt as though they had always been part of the journey. Each one seemed to settle gently into the spaces within me where doubt had once lived, replacing it with something far gentler, far brighter. I worked hard, you must understand that. It was the kind of work that blended seamlessly with the days where effort became rhythm and rhythm became ritual. Sometimes I hardly noticed the passing of time. There would simply be the soft fall of sunlight creeping across the room, or the first flicker of starlight beyond the window pane, letting me know that morning had slipped into evening yet again. There was a satisfaction in those routines, a grounding in the constancy of it, even when uncertainties lingered like shadows in the corners of my mind. I learned to find joy in the smallest of successes, a kind word from a passerby, a suggestion that someone believed in what I was doing, the way the first light of day seemed to dance among the tools and materials I used to create. But as the seasons passed, something remarkable began to stir beneath the surface of those steady days. What had started as something small and fragile, the kind of dream you shield with both hands for fear it might dissipate, was taking on a life of its own. The interest grew, gently at first, and then more steadily. Where there had once been long stretches of stillness, there was motion and momentum. I remember the way it swelled, like rain falling gently into a dry riverbed, filling it drop by drop until the current began to flow. Orders came in more frequently, sometimes from places far beyond the horizon of my little world. I could hardly believe it at times, that people in towns and cities whose names I barely recognized had found something meaningful in what I was creating. Their words, so kind, so unexpected, gave me something I had all but forgotten how to feel: hope. It rose slowly within me, tentative and fragile, like the first breath of spring after a long winter. Along the way, there were people whose kindness and belief astonished me. Some were strangers I encountered only briefly. The elderly man in the park who stopped to ask about my work and left a generous tip in my hand, with a smile so bright it felt like stepping into sunlight. The young woman who became a regular customer, her laughter spilling into each exchange like a melody you can't help but hum along to. And then there were those whose help went beyond mere words. A local shopkeeper who offered to display my work in her window, not because it would benefit her, but because she wanted to see me succeed. A friend of a friend who shared my story online in a post I never would have written myself, but which opened doors I didn't even know existed. Each act of kindness, no matter how small, was like water poured over parched soil, urging something within me to grow. When gratitude took hold, it took root deep within me, anchoring me during the moments when I began to feel overwhelmed. Because there were moments, more than I can count, where joy became so bright that it bordered on disbelief. I remember the first time I received recognition for my work, a small feature in a local publication. It was nothing grandiose, just a paragraph tucked into the corner of a page, but seeing it there made my heart feel as though it were rising on a breeze, light and weightless. That little mention brought more people to my door than I had ever imagined, and with them came stories that mirrored pieces of my own. Conversations began to unfold naturally, filled with shared dreams, quiet laughter, and the sense that, for brief moments at least, the thread of my life was winding into theirs. There was one instance in particular that I find myself returning to now, replaying its soft edges like the turning of a well-worn page. It was late autumn, and the air carried that familiar crispness, the kind that tickles the tip of your nose and makes every breath feel clean and full. I was standing in the quiet of my little shop, arranging the display table for the day, when a family came through the door. They had traveled from quite far, they said, just to visit my little corner of the world. The mother smiled warmly as she spoke, her voice brimming with the ease of familiarity, as though we had known one another in another life. Her words were simple, but weighted. What you've created is special. It's brought us comfort when we needed it most. Thank you. I didn't know how to respond at first. What can you say when someone gifts you their gratitude so openly, so freely? I think I nodded, though I suspect it was more of a half bow, my hands clutching the edge of the table for balance. For the rest of the day, I carried their words close, turning them over in my mind until the truth of them settled fully into my chest. What I was doing mattered. In some small way, it mattered. And so, little by little, joy returned to my life. It came in moments so small and fleeting that I might have overlooked them if not for the quiet attentiveness that had grown within me over these years. The way the late afternoon sun warmed the brick walls of my space, filling the room with a golden glow that felt almost like an embrace. The sound of footsteps on the cobblestones outside, their steady rhythm echoing up through the stillness. The laughter of children running past the windows, carefree and untethered. These little things, all the textures of a life both ordinary and profound, wove themselves into my days until a soft peace began to settle over me like a gentle fog. Though I still worked hard, it no longer felt like a struggle against the current. Instead, it felt as though I had joined the rhythm of something greater, the flow of life itself, which carried me forward with quiet certainty. My venture continued to grow, and with it, so did my faith, not only in what I was creating, but in myself. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I began to feel as though I might, after all, be enough. The nights are quieter now than they once were. When I close my eyes, it is not fear or doubt that fills the space between one breath and the next, but a deep and enduring gratitude for all that has brought me here. I think of the strangers whose kindness bridged the gaps where I faltered, the moments of joy that seemed impossibly delicate, yet remained steadfast. I think of the whispers of hope that carried me this far, guiding me softly, like the tide that draws the shoreline ever closer to the sea. And more than anything, I think of the dreams I held on to, all those years ago, when all I had to cling to was the tiny flicker of a beginning. It is only now, as I sit here in the stillness, that I realize they are still with me, woven into the fabric of what my life has become. Dreams do not disappear, they flourish. Quietly, gently, they make their way into the world, reminding us that even in our darkest hours, there is something within us that yearns for the light. The day my name was etched into stone dawned quietly, like so many others before it. There was no rush, no fanfare, just the steady rise of the sun, painting the horizon in shades of honey and blush. I remember standing outside, barefoot, my toes curling into the cool, damp grass. The morning air lingered with a faint crispness, the kind that feels like a gentle hand resting on your shoulder. A few clouds hung lazily in the sky, their edges brushed with the soft pinks of dawn, and the distant hum of birdsong wove itself into the stillness. For a long moment, I simply stood there, breathing it all in. There was something grounding about the simplicity of the morning, the way the earth seemed to hold its breath, the unhurried rhythm of the world waking up around me. It was a reminder, I supposed, of how far I'd come. Once upon a time, even a moment like this would have felt like an indulgence, a luxury in a life filled with worry and uncertainty. But now, there was a calmness to my days, a stillness that had once seemed so far out of reach. A letter had arrived the evening before, neatly folded inside an envelope with my name handwritten on the front. There'd been something almost ceremonial about the act of opening it. The weight of the paper in my hands, the faint crackle as I eased it open, it all felt significant, as though the act itself was a prelude to the news inside. I'd read the words once, then twice, the meaning sinking in slowly, like a stone dropping into still water. My name would adorn the facade of a building. Not just any building, but one that represented years of work, of belief, of perseverance. It was an honor I hadn't dared to dream of, and yet, here it was, as real and solid as the earth beneath my feet. Even now, as I stood in the soft embrace of the morning, the words from that letter echoed in my mind. A testament to your vision, your hard work, and the resilience that has inspired so many. The sentence lingered, tender and bittersweet. It was not without its weight, not without the memories of all that had come before. I set out later that morning, driving toward the town where it all began. The road stretched out before me, winding gently through fields of wildflowers and tall grass. The sun followed along, dappling the landscape in patches of gold, and the air was filled with the soft hum of cicadas, their song rising and falling like the heartbeat of summer. As the miles passed, I found myself slipping into quiet reflection, the steady rhythm of the journey pulling my mind back through the years. Hardship is such a strange thing. In the moment, it swallows you whole, surrounding you with walls that feel unyielding and permanent. It claws at your spirit, tests the very fabric of your being. But with time softens things. It dulls the edges, smooths the jagged places, until one day you find yourself looking back not with bitterness, but with something almost like gratitude. It's not that the pain disappears. No, it leaves its marks, ghostly impressions that linger in unexpected ways. But it changes you. It shapes you, polishes you, until you're someone you might never have recognized before. The building came into view as I rounded the last curve in the road. For a moment, I simply stared. It stood tall and graceful, its lines clean and elegant against the backdrop of the sky. The late morning light poured over it, warming its surface and casting soft, hazy shadows along the ground. And there, above the entrance, carved into the smooth stone, was my name. I parked the car and stepped out, my feet meeting the paved path with deliberate slowness. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and newly turned earth, mingling with the floral sweetness of nearby blooms and the faint tang of a summer breeze. Each step toward the entrance felt like moving through a dream, my fingers brushing lightly against the railing as I ascended the steps. Standing there, beneath my name, I felt a profound stillness settle over me. My hand instinctively grazed the cool surface of the stone, tracing the letters as though committing them to memory. It was a tactile connection, a physical tie to all that had led me here. The smoothness of the stone grounded me in the present, even as my mind wandered backward through the years. I thought of the nights when sleep had been elusive, stolen by the weight of unanswered questions and unfulfilled hopes. I thought of the mornings when the road ahead had seemed so fogged with uncertainty that I could barely see where my next step would lead. I thought of the countless moments when doubt had crept in, whispering that I was foolish to keep going, to dare to believe in something more. And yet, hadn't those moments been part of the journey too? The thread that ran through all of it was resilience, the quiet, steady resolve that kept me moving forward, one small step at a time, even when the way was unclear. A warm breeze stirred the air around me, rustling the leaves of a nearby tree and carrying the faint scent of honeysuckle. The sound of footsteps caught my attention, soft and deliberate. I turned to see a couple approaching, their hands clasped together, their faces alight with curiosity. They smiled warmly as their gaze flicked between me and the building. "Beautiful, isn't it?" one of them remarked, their voice gentle, almost reverent. I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. "It is," I managed, the words slipping out like a whispered affirmation. We exchanged a few pleasantries before they moved on, their presence fading into the serene hum of the day. I stayed a while longer, the passage of time marked only by the shifting of shadows and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. The building wasn't just a symbol, I realized. It was a reflection of struggle, of perseverance, of growth. It bore witness to a journey that had been as much about healing as it had been about success. What began as a flicker of hope in the darkest of times had grown into something so much larger than myself. And yet, standing there, I couldn't help but feel that this achievement meant far more than any public recognition. It was a quiet testament to the human spirit, to the capacity to endure, to overcome, to create something meaningful even in the face of adversity. As I turned to leave, a wave of gratitude washed over me, profound, bittersweet, and all-encompassing. Gratitude for the struggles that had shaped me, for the people who had supported me, and even for the moments of doubt that had forced me to dig deeper and find my own resolve. Life has a way of weaving its hardships and triumphs together into a tapestry that, while imperfect, is uniquely beautiful. And while the scars of the past may remain, they do not define the whole. They coexist with the laughter, the warmth, the small victories that make life worth living. The sunlight had shifted by the time I returned to my car, casting the world in a warm, golden glow. I sat for a moment before turning the key in the ignition, letting the quiet hum of the engine settle around me. The road stretched out ahead, familiar and inviting, and as the car rolled forward, I felt a soft smile tugging at my lips. This too was part of the journey, each moment unfurling like the pages of a book, carrying me toward whatever lay on the next horizon. The day began as many others had, with the soft embrace of morning light streaming through the window panes, painting the room in hues of amber and cream. Outside, the city moved at its own measured pace, the gentle hum of distant traffic blending with the occasional chirp of birds. A symphony of life that felt both familiar and far away. I sat in the small cafe nestled within the building I now called my own, a refuge I had spent years shaping, brick by brick and dream by dream. The steam from my tea curled upward like a silken ribbon, its warmth spreading across my palms as I cupped the mug. It was a quiet moment, the kind that encouraged introspection rather than action, but today held something more. When I first noticed them, I wasn't entirely sure what I was seeing. Through the expanse of the glass storefront, standing just across the street, there they were, my family. They looked out of place amidst the steady flow of passers-by, rooted there as though tethered to the ground itself, their gazes fixed upward at the building. My chest tightened, the air suddenly heavier, but the world around me did not pause. Life moved onward, as it always does, unaffected by the quiet storms within individual hearts. I dipped my head slightly, allowing my hair to fall forward, creating a veil between them and me, as if that fragile barrier could somehow protect me from the weight of the memories. There was a strange magnetism pulling me to the moment, my eyes drawn back to them despite the gnawing discomfort in my chest. My mother stood closest to the road, her posture regal yet slightly stooped. An unspoken weariness carried in the way she held her bag clutched tightly against her side. I could make out the faint silver streaks threading through her hair, shining softly in the morning light. Behind her, my father rested a hand on her shoulder, his dark coat blending into the shadows of the street. He still had that same firm set to his jaw I remembered from years ago, the one that could silence a room with its sheer certainty. My younger sister leaned against the building's stone exterior, studying the engraved name with a mixture of curiosity and something else, something I couldn't quite place. Pride, perhaps, or surprise? I let myself linger in the warmth of the cafe, cloaked in the smell of rich coffee and freshly baked bread, watching them from behind the safety of the glass. A soft ache began to unfurl within me, a quiet, persistent longing tangled with threads of hurt. How had they come to stand here? What had drawn them to this place after so many years apart? It felt surreal to see them in the context of my new life, separate from the storms and silences that had defined our history. They didn't belong here, and yet there they were. A memory rose unbidden, sharp and vivid, an argument filled with clipped words and slammed doors, followed by months that stretched into years of hesitant reconciliation that never quite blossomed. I shut my eyes briefly against the thought, surrendering to the quiet pull of my breathing. In and out. Slow, steady. I had told myself forgiveness was a path I had begun walking, a seed planted in the soil of my own heart, nurtured by meditation, reflection, and the passing of time. Yet, seeing their faces confronted me with the jagged edges still left unpolished. Forgiveness, they say, is not a gift for others, but for ourselves, a letting go, an unburdening. Was I ready for that? Or was I clinging to the weight of those old wounds, clutching tightly as though letting them fall would mean losing a part of who I had become? The building had come to symbolize so much more to me than mere success. It wasn't about the name etched into stone. It was about the journey, the process of peeling back layers, of unearthing resilience and planting growth in its place. I had found pieces of myself in the cracks and corners of this work, in the long pauses between efforts and the gentle rhythm of persistence. How strange it was now to see my family standing before it like spectators gazing upon an unfamiliar monument. I rose slowly from my seat, the air shifting slightly as the hum of muffled chatter surrounded me. My fingers brushed the surface of the table, feeling its smooth, cool texture beneath my skin, a grounding sensation in the midst of uncertainty. I moved toward the door, my steps deliberate, each one measured as though I were treading deep water. The world outside greeted me gently with the crisp kiss of morning air. It tousled my hair like an old friend, mingling with the faint scent of damp stone and freshly turned earth. The city's quieter moments were like this, effortless, dreamlike, caught in the brief interlude before the day surged forward with its noisy cascade of demands. The sound of footsteps echoed faintly on the pavement as passers-by carried their own lives onward, oblivious to the significance of the moment unfolding within me. My gaze drifted back toward them. My mother's eyes caught mine first, startlingly sharp, even at a distance, as though she had felt my presence before seeing it. Her grip on the strap of her bag slackened slightly, her body softening ever so imperceptibly. I noticed my father turn then, his eyes narrowing as he recognized me, a flicker of emotion, brief yet unmistakable, crossing his features. My sister tilted her head toward them, murmuring something I couldn't hear before glancing over her shoulder toward the source of their attention. Me. I froze mid-step, rooted to the spot as time stretched endlessly between us. Part of me wanted to turn back, to retreat into the safety of the walls I had built with my own hands, to return to the cocoon of solitude I had cultivated so carefully. But another part of me, the part that had long whispered of reconciliation, however improbable, urged me forward. The two impulses collided within me, a quiet turmoil that threatened to pull me apart. Was it fear I felt, or pride, or perhaps shame, tinged with guilt for the years lost? I couldn't tell where one emotion ended and the other began. The boundaries between them blurred like watercolor on damp paper. As my breathing slowed, I closed my eyes again. I turned inward, to the space I had come to trust in times like these. I thought of the teachings I had embraced while building this life. Forgiveness like water, flowing to cleanse and nourish. Peace like sunlight, warm yet unassuming, casting light on the darkened corners within. I had long believed that there was no timeline for healing. It moved at its own pace, often circling back unexpectedly to places we thought we had left behind. This intersection, this unexpected crossroads, felt like one such place. I hadn't planned to confront it today, or ever, but now it stretched out before me, daring me to take the first step. The ache in my chest softened, like ripples fading from the surface of a pond. When my eyes opened, the world around me felt quieter, its edges smoothed by a deeper calm. I started toward them slowly, my steps steady and deliberate this time, bathed in the gentle warmth of the rising sun. Each step felt like both a beginning and an ending, a closing of one chapter and the tentative opening of another. When I finally approached, I stopped short, leaving just enough space between us for the silence to fill. My mother was the first to speak, her voice trembling but deliberate, softening with each word. My father followed, his tone firmer but tempered by something gentler than I had expected. My sister stayed quiet, her gaze fixed on my face as though searching for something she wasn't sure she'd find. I responded slowly, carefully. I didn't rush the words, I let them unfold naturally, like petals opening to the sun. Standing there, cloaked in the quiet weight of our shared history, I realized the healing had already begun. Not with grand gestures or declarations, but in the simple act of meeting one another at this crossroads. We didn't resolve everything in that moment, nor did we need to. Forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about letting the future breathe a little easier. As the conversation ebbed, I glanced back at the building, its intricate stonework catching the light. The name etched into its surface blurred slightly in my vision, softened by the moisture gathering in my eyes. It held a different meaning now, one that carried less pride and more peace, a reminder not of what I had accomplished, but of the growth it had taken to get here. When we parted that day, the air felt lighter, as though the city itself had exhaled along with me. We had taken small steps toward one another, leaving space for the possibility of connection, for the gentle unfolding of something new. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't a destination, but a journey. And today I had begun walking it, not alone, but together. The moon hung low in the sky that evening, a silver lantern casting its quiet light over the familiar path beneath my feet. The night air was cool and carried with it the faintest hint of something sweet, perhaps the distant bloom of jasmine, or maybe just the memory of it. My footsteps on the soft earth were gentle. Each step felt deliberate, carrying me closer to a place I had avoided for far too long. The quiet hum of the world at rest seemed to mirror the stillness I sought within myself. It was strange, really, how something so calm could feel so weighted. But this was the night I knew I had to walk this path, and so I did. The house came into view slowly, its outline soft in the moonlight, just as I remembered it. The edges of the shutters were worn now, weathered by years of wind and rain, and yet it still carried the shape of the place I used to call home. My breath tightened in my chest as I paused just before the gate. The ivy I used to watch creeping up along the fence had fully taken hold, weaving through the wood as though it had always belonged. I reached out, my fingers grazing one of the tiny star-shaped leaves. Its surface was smooth and cool under my fingertips. I stood there for a moment, feeling my heartbeat settle, the rhythm steadying like waves evening out at sea. There was no rush. When I finally stepped forward, the movement felt effortless, as though I were guided by something beyond myself, a gentle pull drawing me to the front door. The wooden planks creaked lightly beneath my feet, the sound as familiar as breathing. I raised my hand to knock, but my fingers hesitated midair. For just a moment, an old fear stirred, the fear of rejection, of hard words, of wounds reopened. But then, as the coolness of the night breeze brushed my face, I let that fear drift away, carried off with the wind. Tonight wasn't about clinging to what had been. It was about making space for what could be. When the door opened, the light spilling out was warm and soft, like the tender glow of lanterns on a gentle autumn evening. For a moment, no words were exchanged. We just stood there, drinking in the sight of one another after all these years. Time had aged us all differently, but there was something in their faces, something deep in their eyes, that felt unchanged. It reminded me of the nights we spent on the old porch swing, talking beneath the stars, until the sky turned a soft, sleepy gray with the coming dawn. That memory flickered between us now, unspoken, but alive. "Hello," I said finally, my voice a quiet thread in the stillness. It wasn't much, but it was enough to break the dam of silence. Their faces softened, as though a weight neither of us had acknowledged was quietly being lifted. "Come in," they said, their voice soft, almost unsure, but welcoming nevertheless. And so, I stepped through the doorway. Inside, the house felt smaller than I remembered. But perhaps that was because I had grown. Not in stature, but in understanding of what it was to carry oneself with peace rather than pride. The walls were lined with mementos, old photographs tucked into mismatched frames, faded postcards pinned to a corkboard near the hallway, a few worn books stacked haphazardly on the corner of the side table. These were the markers of lives that had continued even when I wasn't there. We sat in the living room together, the distant sound of the wind outside brushing through the trees filling the silence between our words. At first, the conversation came in starts and stops, like the way a fire hesitates to catch before it begins to glow. There were cautious apologies, not just from me, but from everyone in small, humble ways. There was no dramatic proclamation, no floodgate of tears, just the slower, deeper current of understanding making its way through the room. It was enough. Healing doesn't always sound like a symphony. Sometimes it's quieter than that, like the softest rustle of leaves. I listened as they spoke of the years I had missed, the joys, the losses, the quiet moments in between. I spoke, too, of the path I had taken, the mistakes, the lessons, the unexpected beauty I had stumbled across along the way. And somewhere in the midst of it all, something began to shift. The guarded edges between us softened, turning into something else entirely. Rediscovery. I saw glimpses of the children we once were in the way we smiled at one another, small and hesitant at first, then brighter, warmer, until laughter began to fill the space between us. It wasn't the raucous laughter of old times, but a kind of gentle joy that felt earned and steady. The hours slipped by unnoticed as we spoke, our words weaving a tapestry of shared history, mended and made whole again. At some point, someone brought out a stack of old photographs. The black and white images had faded at the edges, their corners curled with age. We passed them around, remembering the stories behind each one. My fingers lingered on a picture of us standing together in the garden, a memory from years ago. I could almost hear the laughter of that day, feel the sun against my skin and the soil beneath my fingers. "We were brave once," I said softly, and I meant it. We were brave then, and somehow we were brave now, brave enough to face this moment and the truths it carried. The night grew ever deeper, and slowly, our conversation began to quiet. There was a rhythm to this silence, too, less like the stillness of distance, and more like the calm of an evening meadow, where the only sound is the occasional rustle of tall grass bending to the breeze. We stayed like that for a while, our shared presence speaking louder than any words could. Eventually, I found myself drawn to the porch. Pulling the door open, I stepped outside, the night greeting me like an old friend. The stars above sparkled brightly, tiny points of light scattered across the vast canvas of the sky. I leaned on the railing, gazing upward, and felt the cool wood press gently into the palms of my hands. Behind me, I heard the faint creak of the door. One by one, my family joined me on that porch, their steps soft against the old wooden planks. Together, we looked upward, letting the quiet beauty of the universe wash over us. The breeze carried with it the earthy smell of the garden and something else, something softer. Perhaps it was the intangible scent of a moment you know will linger within you long after it's passed. I felt my heart settle deeper into my chest, heavy not with unease, but with something akin to gratitude. Gratitude for this place, for these people, for the chance to be here in this moment, under these stars, for the chance to have made it full circle. I closed my eyes for a moment and simply breathed. The air filled my lungs easily, as though it too had let go of whatever had weighed it down. As the first whispers of morning's arrival began to stir in the distance, the faintest light brushing against the edges of the sky, I quietly excused myself. There was nothing left to say that night. Everything that needed to be spoken had already been. I made my way back down that familiar path, my steps now lighter than they had been when I'd arrived. The world felt softer underfoot, as though it had shifted alongside me. Change was like that, I supposed, quiet yet profound. Reaching a small clearing just beyond the gate, I paused to look back at the house one final time. The light from the porch still glowed faintly, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw the faint outline of my family still standing there in the doorway, watching me go. I smiled softly to myself, the calm clarity of understanding settling into the deepest corners of my being. For the first time in as long as I could remember, the past felt at peace with the present. I tilted my head back, my gaze drinking in the stars one last time. Their quiet brilliance seemed to whisper the same message I had been chasing all these years, that the universe was vast and forgiving, filled with endless horizons waiting to be explored. And yet, it was also tender and close, offering not just the promise of the far off, but the comfort of being exactly where one was meant to be. I took a deep breath and let it fill me, and as the world around me softened into an embrace of stillness, I whispered into the night, "Thank you." Now, as you rest beneath your own canopy of stars, I hope the quiet peace of this moment lingers with you. Thank you for joining me on this journey tonight. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel for more tales to calm your heart and settle your mind. Sweet dreams, may your rest be deep and soothing. Good night, sleep well, and I'll see you in the next story.